Welcome to Regulatory Ramblings. Our podcast today is brought to you by the University of Hong Kong's RegTech Lab, the HKU SEF FinTech Academy, the Asia Global Institute, the HKU edX Professional Certificate in FinTech, and support from the University's Faculty of Law. I'm your host, Ajay Shamdasani. The common theme for today's broadcast is FinTech and Web3 writ large, with an eye towards digital assets and virtual currency. In today's Spotlight segment, we'll be speaking with a returning guest and dear friend of the program, Syed Ahmed. He's the founder and managing director of FinStep Asia. We'll be discussing the recently disseminated Web3 Blueprint, Building a Web3 International Financial Hub report, for which he was a co-lead, along with Sean Lee of Web3 Harbour's Policy Committee, and one of the key leaders of the Blueprint taskforce. Following that, we'll be chatting with local lawyer Joshua Chu on the recently passed Genius Act in the U.S. and what it means for making the U.S. a stablecoin hub, along with Hong Kong's own Stablecoin Ordinance. But first, the Hong Kong Web3 Blueprint report should be seen as a roadmap for hastening blockchain development in the territory. For that purpose, Web3 Harbour joined forces with PwC Hong Kong to launch 5 action groups this past August on stablecoins, funds, and other critical segments. Ultimately, it's a call to arms for more investment to accelerate the development of blockchain infrastructure in the SAR. The report highlights the, quote, transparency, security, and user empowerment, end quote, of decentralization. As the SCMP put it, quote, the blueprint seeks to leverage what it calls Web3 superpowers, quote unquote, through the development of 5 key enablers: talent, market infrastructure, standards, regulation, and funding and economic contribution. It calls on the participants to focus on open finance, trade finance, capital markets, asset management, and carbon markets, end quote. In fact, Web3 Harbour's chairman, Gary Liu, formerly CEO of The Post, said greater private-public collaboration was amongst its goals, but its primary goal was to be a guide for where the private sector should focus its efforts. And now, joining us are Musheer Ahmed and Sean Lee. Musheer has over 18 years of extensive experience as an ecosystem builder in the realms of capital markets, fintech, and virtual assets, including a decade as a global markets trader prior to coming to Hong Kong to attain his MBA from HKU and London Business School's joint program. Since 2016, Musheer has contributed extensively to building the region's fintech and virtual asset ecosystem, particularly as the co-founder and as a concurrent board member and the inaugural general manager of the FinTech Association of Hong Kong. For almost 5 years, he's been the managing director of FinStep Asia, a firm which he founded. And in the interim, from October 2022 to January 2024, he served as a financial markets risk assurance lead with the Virtual Assets Regulatory Authority in Dubai. Sean Lee is an experienced leader in Web3 and FinTech, devoted to regulatory advocacy and transformation of digital assets and currencies. Currently, he's the co-founder and CSO of IDA, leading the strategic direction of its stablecoin and digital asset business. Sean is also senior advisor to the Crypto Council for Innovation, a global alliance engaging with regulators and policymakers to advocate for digital assets and cryptocurrencies. He's also a mentor at the MIT Entrepreneurship and FinTech Innovation Node, an elected member of the Cyberport Entrepreneurship Committee Advisory Group of the Hong Kong SAR government. Before his work in the fields of crypto and blockchain, Sean held leadership positions in cloud computing and open source software development companies, working closely with leading financial services institutions on Wall Street and in Asia. And with that, gentlemen, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for inviting us.
Thanks for having us, Ajay.
Thanks. So let's start there. How do we get there?
I think the whole premise of our blueprint and also the momentum that we have been driving in Hong Kong over the last few years is that, for Hong Kong or really any country or city to be a digital asset hub, there are a number of things that need to be in place. Regulatory clarity is obviously one of them. But at the end of the day, just having regulation without an ecosystem doesn't exactly make you a digital asset hub. So our blueprint was very much around what do we need to build the ecosystem to be from the perspective of the industry players that are both here domestically in Hong Kong, as well as international players that sees Hong Kong and the Greater China area to be an area of expansion and growth as well. So our approach is very much around what the industry needs to do based on the regulatory frameworks that are already in place, giving feedback in terms of what future regulation frameworks may need to be put in place as well. And then at the same time, more importantly, give the industry some guidance on the areas that the government and the broader industry may feel like are areas that needs to be added, innovated upon, adjusted, and or changed from that perspective, so that we can have a blueprint, a roadmap, so to speak, that we can pursue all together. So that's why you'll see in the blueprint that we very much focused on not only the regulatory aspects and also the infrastructure aspect. We also have a lot of coverage around how do you bring in global liquidity, how do you build a talent development ecosystem, both here in Hong Kong with the universities, as well as from attracting talents coming to Hong Kong. And then also, of course, being Hong Kong being where it is, that interconnectedness, along with China's strategy based on blockchain-based finance and also CBDC as well. So all of those aspects were what we very much focused on as a task force to put into the paper that went through a lot of consultations with the industry as well as with various sector within the government. So all in all, a team effort, a really industry-based team effort, and thus far, I think the feedback has been very well received, and also you could see from the recent announcement of the LEAP Policy 2.0 statement, as well as the Aspire roadmap that came out of SFC, where I think the industry and the regulator are all quite aligned in terms of the direction that we want to see Hong Kong to pursue into.
Just to supplement what Sean has said and he's given you a comprehensive overview of the blueprint, in addition to your introduction, Ajay, I think a key element for us was we didn't want just like a research paper, right? So this wasn't let's do an exercise to find what's missing, gap analysis and speak about it. It was truly about what are practical on the ground requirements, A, on the policy side, B, on the ecosystem building side, and C was in terms of stitching those two together and knitting them closely, because we are in this era of relatively newer for most countries in terms of the blockchain digital assets work, and that provides Hong Kong with an opportunity to lead not just regionally but globally, right? So what were the key ingredients in which we have highlighted upon? And in addition to that, we weren't looking at just say a short-term fix or alignment. It was also to look at a 5-year plan in terms of what can be built, aligning in some senses with the approach that's often taken in 5-year plans, but saying, okay, here's our 5 pillars. We want to add towards it. We want to have the industry growing, and this is kind of your North Star in which direction you can go. I would go as far as saying that the blueprint is a live document or a living document, as some people like to say it, wherein we will keep updating it from time to time. We have the different task force and groups that will be active starting in a few weeks' time, which will take further action and going deeper into verticals. But this is stage one of how the industry can evolve. And as Sean mentioned, we're very pleased to see great feedback from the industry on this providing a structured way of approaching the future for Hong Kong's Web3, but also seeing the alignment in terms of the government and regulatory policy being also towards pulling in the same direction. I'll pause there.
Well, it seems to me that you guys, as the authors of this report, were part of the team that authored it. you're not shy about thinking big. 'Cause, I mean, and I think something that resonated with a lot of people is that the report outlines how Web3 technologies can drive sustainable development and, you know, unlock economic growth, but ultimately raise Hong Kong's digital finance leadership footprint, not just regionally, where some would be content with that, but globally, you guys really do think big. But as someone once said to me, a dream is something you strive towards, a delusion is something you live in. Does Hong Kong have the wherewithal, the intellectual talent to drive it forward? You can build the hardware, no problem, but the real secret sauce is the people. And this has been a lingering issue. Drawing the right talent here is are high taxes. I'm sorry, high salaries and low taxes enough? Because many of these people not wanting to come to Hong Kong, recent-ish 2019 to 2023 aside, the protests, the riots, the Chinese government, the COVID, all of that notwithstanding the bad press we've gotten in recent years, the big impediment drawing people, top talent here, is the quality of life issue. So again, I say, are high salaries and low taxes enough?
Yeah, but I think stage one, right? Hong Kong has often had, and me as being in Hong Kong for 11 years, one of the things I often observe about Hong Kong is it tends to be low key. It tends to be very much humble in terms of at a global stage, right? We don't shout from the rooftops about our successes and how well we've done and the position we have,
And
right?
it only adopts
Yeah,
things oftentimes when it's been tried and tested in other jurisdictions. We play it safe, which has its virtues, but that also means then you're not leading, you're not innovating. And what I noticed that's different about this document is this really
yeah.
is a call to arms. Hong Kong, you've got to chart your own path and show people what you can do.
From a Hong Kong perspective, we are a top three financial hub, global financial hub, right? We have one of the deepest capital markets in the world. We're a top IPO hub here. So there's a lot of things that are big about Hong Kong at a global scale, and it has shown leadership in bridging the East and the West, in particular with mainland China to other centers across the Belt and Road and beyond. And so I think first is we have all the fundamental foundations to think big and actually achieve big, number one. Number two, to the point in terms of innovation, etc., I think, yes, the industry is more services based over the last 2-3 decades, but innovation is part of the Hong Kong fabric, as I say, right, in capital market structuring, knowing ways of doing things in a proper regulated legal way and being able to build on top for various capital structures, aligning with mainland China, aligning with the global financial services world, and having a top regulatory framework has been something Hong Kong has achieved. And there is that deep talent. People in Hong Kong understand capital markets like very few other places in the world, possibly New York and London at that scale. And thirdly, touching upon the point on talent, it's a very valid point. Talent is a very critical element of any innovation ecosystem. I do think we've seen significant work being done by the government supporting universities with millions of dollars of funding for startups and innovation, besides what has been done with Science Park and Cyberport. Plus the fact that there's these multiple top talent schemes. Yes, there's been a large amount of talent coming from mainland China, but there is also very high quality top talent that's coming in. So we don't necessarily always have to think about all the time having very, very international talent, which is very good to have. It provides a lot of diversity, but having top talent, be it from our from the Greater Bay Area or beyond, is also very useful. And lastly, what I want to speak to on the innovation and talent world is, with the government showing the support from a LEAP framework, and one of the other elements was about academic research about supporting talent and growing the ecosystem. People in Hong Kong have they've been very significant crypto firms, virtual asset firms, call them what you may, blockchain firms that have originated in Hong Kong, right? Either started here or grew here significantly. And this is every big name has some Hong Kong connection or the other, which also tells that as a jurisdiction, we've had exposure to virtual assets and Bitcoin and blockchain for much longer than most jurisdictions in the world. And we have people who understand both the technology and the business models. People like Sean, people like those we have in the Web3 Harbour board who understand this and are able to make the transition towards what is now happening, which is the tokenization of money. And that's the distinction between a crypto world to a tokenization of money in the Web3 world, where we have that advantage of knowledge of capital, knowledge of finance, and knowledge of blockchain and crypto to bring all of those together. And that will be one of the key elements to raise our level and standard as becoming the leader and a global hub for virtual assets. Sean, if you want to add.
I think the only thing I would add to that, Musheer, is in this space, liquidity is king. People are naturally going to go where the liquidity is going towards and where the capital is actually being deposited as well. So we've already seen a number of cycles. As Musheer mentioned before, Hong Kong used to be one of the top crypto hubs way back when the whole industry got started. Then, of course, there were a lot of restrictions both from a regulatory perspective and also, quite frankly, from a incentive perspective as well that other jurisdictions have come up with. So there were a lot of talents that left Hong Kong and went to places like Singapore and UAE and whatnot. What we are seeing, though, given the industry is maturing, institutions are picking up their game, regulators are providing more clarity. There's now actually a lot of people that are coming back to Hong Kong. So with these talents coming back to Hong Kong, being they are already kind of industry veterans, that will naturally attract new talent coming to Hong Kong as well. So, I would probably say over the last 12 months or so, the entire landscape from a talent perspective has dramatically changed. You could see from earlier this year when we had Consensus that was being held in Hong Kong for the very first time. There were so many people coming from abroad that came into Hong Kong, understanding what the landscape looked like, talk to the government, talk to the regulator, talk to the industry players here. And many of them have committed to either open a branch here or actually some of them are moving here. So I think the future is looking very bright, especially when you have public and private sector both working together towards a common goal. It is actually what you want to look for. And I'm proud that we are traversing in that direction.
Just to last points. I think we understand the economic and the policy rationale, but why release the report now? And if we were to put this in terms of the average person as to what these long-term changes will mean to them, yes, you and I can foresee that we're talking about the financial infrastructure of the future, but we had a guest on some time back, Brian Michael, a Harvard and Oxford trained economist, former research fellow at HKU Law School, who pointed out that people like us, policymakers, academics, pundits, journalists, we can talk about this all we want, but the net result is Generation Z, he said, has no say in the financial infrastructure that's going to undergird and rule their future. I'd like to hear your thoughts.
That's actually, I think, fundamentally where this entire industry is going, right? Like if you think about the notion of why Bitcoin was created or the Bitcoin white papers written in the first place, it was really to break through that very rigid, very centralized, power in the few type of hierarchy that the world lived in and continue to live in from a financial services perspective. Now, of course, we also understand from the last few years that you can't exactly live in a completely trustless and decentralized world where money is freely flowing from one place to another because there's just too many problems that comes out of it. So we are now going towards a place where you're bringing that innovation, that speed of that speed of the internet in terms of not only passing messages and content, but now also passing monetary value into more compliant centric frameworks. Now, I think it's giving people a lot more comfort in terms of where things are. Now, your point about Gen Z, right? Gen Zs are naturally digital, right? They're natively digital. So I actually have much less of a concern for the younger generation to accept this new form of technology.
Not in terms of use of the technology, but the rules undergirding it.
But the rules that are governing it, well, the rules are in place. The rules are there for a reason. It is, we all have to accept a world where when you have innovation, that innovation still needs to play by some of the rules that the world is predicated on, right? So it's just a evolutionary behavior.
I guess what I was thinking of,
Yeah.
we are setting the rules that they will have to live by when they come of age.
But then they will also be the one adjusting the rules as they go along as well.
Yeah, and maybe just to add to that, right? I hear where this is coming from. Probably this is the overall conversation of baby boomers have set the rules for the broader world, and the millennials are kind of following that path. And where does this leave Gen Z having to live through at a very macro level?
Or
So number one,
forget that. What about us in Gen X?
So
we had to straddle the analog and digitally.
Yeah, correct, right? So I think, as Sean mentioned, these are Gen Z is very digital natives, right? They understand this world a lot better than most of us do. Bitcoin, blockchain, Dogecoin, meme coins, all of this is very natural to them. We've had to learn and understand this, but for them, it's very, very natural because they grew up in that era. So when it comes to defining the rules, I think they have a lot more say because they're kind of building the business models as well. Like if your business model is not impactful, then it's not going to work. And if the other one's building the business models, they're also building the governance and the rules around it. And it's in transition phase, right? So that's point one. Point two is we have to distinguish a little bit about your traditional finance and that piece of the industry, which is what's happening with tokenization of finance right now, which is where it's heavily regulated, which is a world that is not just about building rules, but it's also about consumer protection. And that's what is happening and being shaped in Hong Kong. The beauty of Hong Kong's regimes are you have consultation process and everybody can give feedback. And as with the blueprint as well, we engaged a host of different people. And I would say that there was a mixture of young people and as well as experienced people. As you would see, we had the blockchain club as well from HKU Consulting Club, which was part of the conversation and supporting us as well. So we have those inputs in our paper, and we have had inputs broader industry as well. And you're right, they need to be part of it, and that's where the blueprint comes in as enabling them to give that insight, showcase. And the Web3 world is very receptive and very open to ideas and concepts, right? So I think the Gen Z has a much bigger voice in today's world, and through the blueprint and other places, we can be the conduits to relay that messages to the government, to the policymakers, if it's not possible for Gen Z. So I would encourage the Gen Zs to use us as a conduit if they have differing views. But we are very much aligned in terms of taking this to the next step. And this is a broader policy, and it is about a talent piece, as you mentioned, is one of our core 5 pillars. And we do want to develop talent, and not just in terms of, hey, tech talent, but also talent that can take forward the industry from a business perspective as well, and growing the industry with newer business models that can be applicable and can have pick up in the modern context.
Yeah, I guess that is the question: how democratized and how egalitarian will the Web3 ecosystem of the future be?
Yeah.
I guess I mean, one last point, and I'll before we wrap up though, and I'll put this to you guys. Any closing thoughts you'd like to conclude with?
We've gone through a lot of cycles, economic, social, otherwise, in the last 10 years in Hong Kong. And we've now reached a stage where policymakers, regulators, and the industry are fairly aligned, especially when it comes to the future of finance in this city, right? And this is an opportunity for us. It's not just great for us to pat our backs that, hey, the regulators are aligned, we are aligned, the industry wants to do it. Now is the time for action. And I'm pleased that there's a lot more on the ground work that players like Invest Hong Kong, Cyberport, Science Park, all of these guys are putting a lot of effort to galvanize the ecosystem. And like us with the Web3, we also want to bring in the industry to actively participate and not just comment, right? So for me, the main element is now is the time for us to action. We are among the leading centers when it comes to completing the regulatory frameworks for virtual assets. In a few months, we'll have almost everything covered, if not everything. And we have a mature ecosystem, and it is a momentum for tokenization of finance. So we should pick up that momentum, and that would be critical for us to reemerge as a more international center for the future of finance.
Short comment to wrap up. I would say if you're students that's listening to the podcast, whether you're in finance or tech or computer science or engineering, doesn't really matter whether you're in a technical degree or not. This is a space to watch out on. This is a space that is fast evolving. It is maturing. We are now living in one of the leading hubs. And I think this would be a great opportunity to identify where a potential career could be actually, going towards. So keep an eye out on that.
Musheer, Sean, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you for having us, Ajay. It's a pleasure.
And we'll be right back. And we're back. In this segment, we'll be discussing the enactment of the new Genius Act in the U.S. on July 18th and what was labeled Crypto Day during that country's recent Crypto Week. The U.S. House of Representatives first passed the Clarity Market Structure Bill and then the Genius Act, the latter of which was signed into law by President Trump. These moves by Congress were seen as historic steps toward the regulation of virtual assets in the United States. Or as one pundit put it, crypto, your time has come. The U.S. legislation is the first standalone bill aimed at providing clarity for the growing cryptocurrency ecosystem, particularly the regulation of stablecoin. These are heady times indeed. I mean, and it's nothing short of landmark legislation which establishes the first regulatory guidelines for stablecoins in the United States. A recent Chainalysis article stated that there is no country in which the development of digital asset regulation is more closely watched than the United States. And now with the passage of the Genius Act and progress with the Clarity Act, the U.S. joins a growing group of countries that are firmly on their way to establishing clear regulatory frameworks for digital assets. The Act focuses on establishing regulatory frameworks for stablecoins, including provisions for consumer protection, asset backing, and compliance with the 1970 Bank Secrecy Act. All heady stuff. According to TRM Labs, stablecoins now represent over 60% of all crypto transaction volume, up from just 35% 2 years ago. More than 90% of fiat-backed stablecoins in circulation are pegged to the US dollar. TRM estimates that 99% of stablecoin activity is licit. Their speed, scale, liquidity have made them appealing for illicit uses as well, including ransomware payments, fraud, and terrorist financing. Now, the Genius Act, the acronym stands for Guiding and Establishing National Innovation for U.S. Stablecoins. The provisions for reserve requirements for stablecoin issuers, consumer protection, and AML aim to provide greater stability and security for stablecoin markets, ensuring they're better integrated into the broader U.S. financial system. And this marks a key moment for the regulatory framework governing digital assets in the U.S. and works to balance innovation with risk management. As for the Clarity Act, it addresses broader market structure issues within the cryptocurrency space. The Senate is working on its own market structure bill. After both chambers have acted, they will conference reconcile their differences and finalize a version of the Clarity Bill that will move forward, and that'll be likely this fall. The passage of both bills reflects a significant effort to provide clear regulatory guidance for the crypto market, helping to address the growing need for oversight as the industry continues to expand. Now, at almost the same time, half a world away in Hong Kong, the territory's Stablecoin Ordinance and related implementation guidelines issued by the Hong Kong Monetary Authority commenced operation on August 1st, 2025, with a transitional period granted for solely issuance purposes. The new regime is touted as a significant milestone for the city's growing digital assets market. According to a recent briefing by King & Wood Mallesons, it is, quote, relevant to institutions that wish to engage in the primary market issuance of fiat-referenced stablecoins, as well as other secondary market transactions in or involving Hong Kong. Even if you're outside Hong Kong, you should pay attention to the restrictions imposed on the Stablecoins Ordinance for any stablecoin-related activities with the Hong Kong nexus, end quote. So what does that entail? Well, the new Stablecoin Ordinance regulates issuers of stablecoins and the structure of a stablecoin itself, offers of stablecoins, and thirdly, related market integrity and conduct matters. So the ordinance regulates quote unquote specified stablecoins, which are stablecoins deemed cryptographically secure digital representations of value that purport to maintain a stable value with reference wholly to one or more official currencies or other HKMA specified units of account or stores of economic value. And that comes under Section 4 of the Stablecoin Ordinance. Granted, it's a technical definition, but essentially it captures one, a stablecoin linked to an official currency, and two, a stablecoin linked to other units of account or stores of economic value, in each case as designated by the HKMA by notice published in the Gazette. To date, the HKMA has not specified any such units of account or stores of economic value, but the expectation is that they may include commodities such as gold. Now, with us to discuss these developments and their longer-term implications for our region and the world is Joshua Chu, a returning guest and friend of the program. He's a prominent Hong Kong lawyer in all matters fintech and crypto and a prolific writer. His opinion and insights are much sought after by the local press and correspondents of major foreign news organizations operating in the city. You can hear him often at his most candid on radio at RTHK, and he's also co-chair of the Hong Kong Web3 Association and legal advisor to the Hong Kong Blockchain Association. Josh, thank you so much for joining us.
Oh, thank you for having me again.
So what's all the hype about? Because I mean, the general public, like, okay, ho hum, crypto's been here for a while and continue to be here. But those that the true acolytes, the true observers, the true crypto believers, they have been over the moon in recent times because of all these legislative developments. What's hype and what's substantive?
Well, actually, the passage of these laws have drawn both praise and criticism from people within the community, which I'll go into detail about it. But what we have seen is a lot of over politicizing of these legislation that have been coming out, with legislators and politicians coming out to claim credit. Each jurisdiction, for example, both saying they're the first stablecoin legislation. For example, Hong Kong's legislation was actually passed before the U.S. Genius Act was passed, and they just ignored the existence of each other, with American politicians coming out saying this is the first stablecoin law being out there on the market. And when
clearly they were playing to the gallery of the national audience,
domestic audience indeed, but it also seems that they are quite ignorant of a few facts. For example, the very first stablecoin related legislation actually came out years ago, back in 2023 in Japan, which actually came up with the PSA, the Payment Services Act, back at over 2 years ago. And that was actually the world's first stablecoin legislation. And we can see how it actually has significant influence. And one of the things that a lot of, again, politicians seem to have ignored is these bills are put forward by certain parties, right? And when they are put forward, a lot of times they actually kind of gloss over the fact that a lot of these jurisdictions are only putting forward legislation because of regulatory agendas set by the Financial Action Task Force, which is an international body dealing with anti-money laundering related crimes established under since the passage of the UN resolution, basically focusing on the need to basically have AML and counter-terrorist financing. So that having been said, again, the first legislation that actually came out was 2023 in Japan, which actually was the first jurisdiction that acted on FATF's very first indication that that regulators really need to rein in on stablecoin because of certain illicit payments being traced back to having been conducted using stablecoin as an emerging sort of crime-related activities, and we're actually seeing a lot of it. So it's actually just getting in line with international standards and avoid being labeled as a money laundering haven. And that's what we're seeing right now.
I'm glad you touched upon the point about politicization because, I mean, within the U.S., there are those that say, I mean, focusing more on the Genius Act now, that say that they're encouraged by inclusion of sections 401 and 404, which they say appropriately recognize the importance of international regulatory alignment, mutual recognition pathways, and cross-border experimentation through regulatory sandboxes. Particularly with Section 404 on international cooperation, aligning with the policy direction of the President's January 2025 executive order and subsequent White House statements on preserving U.S. digital asset leadership and protecting economic liberty, rejecting central bank digital currency CBDC based models as incompatible with U.S. values. Why is the U.S.? I mean, is it because they're just so doctrinaire on when it comes to free markets? The market should guide things. Why is CBDCs an anathema in the U.S., whereas I don't think anyone would accuse China or Hong Kong of being anti-free market? People in other parts of the world are more open to it, and beyond that, is it necessary in the world's best interest to have the U.S. guiding the shape of legislation? Because certainly that's what the Americans would prefer.
Well, I'm glad you brought up this point because back when you talk about the crypto week, a lot of hype had been put into three pieces of legislation that was aimed to being passed in the U.S. The first one being the Genius Act, the Sable Act, and the Anti-CBDC Act. Now, in the U.S., for example, there's a long history of struggle between the central banks and the executive branch. For example, I believe it was Andrew Jackson. One of his most famous struggles back in the 1800s was he
Against the organization of a central bank. Yeah.
Exactly. He was extremely sick, and at one point of time, and Congress and the Senate tried to rush certain legislation in, and he utilized his veto power to fight against the very concept of central bank institution. Now, of course, one of the things that we need to keep in mind of laws are, at the end of the day, when we peel away the international influence, laws are supposed to be a reflection of the value of the cultures that enact them on a local level, of course. And when we look in this regards, we see two very distinct trends happening. I always compared that China's law and Hong Kong law. The difference is between the continental system versus that of common law. Hong Kong was a British colony, and therefore we gravitate towards common law. And what we will see is in a lot of common law jurisdictions, there is a huge significant favor towards stablecoin, for example, versus the continental system, MiCA, in the EU and China, which basically focus on the creation of CBDC. And one of the interesting aspects about the Stablecoin Ordinance that a lot of legal practitioners seem to have missed is the fact that we have clearly delineated what a stablecoin is versus that of a CBDC, which is a clear intent of basically having an integration ramp between the two type of system. And we'll probably see Hong Kong being one of the more advantageous system out there. You're being able to cater to both the continental system, which again, Chinese law, for example, has a lot of elements drawn from the continental system. That's why Chinese law have a lot of similarities with German law, for example. civil law system versus that of Hong Kong. And that is something to be seen. Of course, we're going to see a lot more developments coming our way as well with respect to how the three pieces of legislation is going to come together in the U.S. Of course, the anti-CBDC Act as of today, the recording of this podcast at least, have only been passed in Congress, have yet to be been passed in the Senate chambers.
I agree that laws are a reflection of the cultural and historical context in which that they were passed, and certainly the Genius Act in that regard, it really it's tapped into the zeitgeist. It's a reflection of the mood on the ground in the market right now, and we've had, Henry Ashlanian, arguably the doyen of all things fintech and crypto, and point out that this last election in the U.S. can rightly be regarded as the election that crypto bought, or the election that crypto won, because many people are one-issue voters, and for them it was crypto, and they had it with the Biden administration's anti-crypto stance, and if you look at, again, Section 404 of the Genius Act, I mean, it echoes key provisions. I mean, particularly Section 3B2, which requires reciprocal arrangements with foreign jurisdictions for foreign stablecoin market access in the U.S. and interoperability and global regulatory alignment. I mean, some see it as a constraint. Others say, no, it's not a constraint to U.S. sovereignty. To the contrary, it's a means of reinforcing it because it ensures U.S. standards and values and institutions shape the international rule book for digital assets. So in that context, those that want America to lead say U.S. leadership is not optional. It's a strategic imperative. Personally, I don't know if that's necessarily in the best interest of the rest of the world. And so, the crypto, but it's true, the crypto and digital asset industry cannot scale without global coordination, and the U.S. does have a vital leadership role to play in forging reciprocal frameworks with like-minded regulators. I'm just saying, I don't think it should necessarily be the only one shaping those rules, and so, therein lies the quandary. Do you see greater harmonization for crypto rules as we've seen in other areas of finance, like, say, trading of swaps and derivatives and futures and things of that nature?
Now, again, some of the before jumping into this particular question, I would also like to point out the fact that a lot of the people that have been criticizing the legislative process in the U.S., notwithstanding they're actually just trying to be FATF compliant at the end of the day, so that they don't end up being labeled as some money laundering haven, is the fact that the Trump family has been heavily involved within the crypto space. And the question has actually arisen whether there are any conflict of interest. For example, the fact that the legislation have came out would have actually meant that incumbent players would have to adjust their practices significantly, or to an extent at least, to be complying with the new rules that came out. And with the World Liberty being aimed at rolling out their own stablecoin systems out there, is this going to give them a huge competitive advantage? These are all nuances that are going to be seen. And while on the surface legislation seem fine, it's always up to regulators that will say that that will see whether there are nuances with other players as to whether they're fully complying with the legislation on the local level. So again, lots of development to be seen based on how the laws are going to be carried out by the regulators and how the industry will actually continue to react. For example, USDT, the Tether, right after the passage of the Genius Act, welcomes the passage of the acts because it does crystallize a lot of this legal uncertainties in the past, nevertheless said that they will actually come out with a US specific product for the US market, so that it will be it wouldn't affect the practice of Tether in general in the open space. And we'll see how this plays out, of course. The other thing, of course, is the Clarity Act essentially gave meme coins a free pass. And as we all remember, Trump, during the election run, one of his biggest focus was not so much as the election, but selling meme coins, the Trump token, the Melania token, that have gained a lot of raised eyebrow, for example. Recently, they have actually used the meme coin as a way of getting access to the White House. The president, of course, which as Trump has actually emphasized is in his personal capacity, nonetheless to raise a lot of eyebrow, because we have major crypto player from Asia and Hong Kong flying into the White House, being one of the top holders of the Trump token. So these are all interesting things that are happening. Now, some people even say that the Clarity Act is to a certain extent a form of deregulation, because we've seen a lot of rug pulls happening as well within the meme coin space.
It's interesting to note that we have Bitcoin Asia that will be held in Hong Kong
Yes.
August 28th and 29th, and I believe one of the Trump sons is one of the speakers, so it will be
Eric Trump will be
Yeah.
coming to Hong Kong.
Yeah.
And one of the other interesting things that I've recently written about in Cointelegraph, for example, is how much influence can China have within the crypto sphere. For example, China is actually known as the second largest holder of crypto. And one of the upcoming strategies that China has pivoted, of course, is to liquidate seized virtual assets through license exchange. Now, this is actually very interesting, because it gives essentially one government a significant leverage in influencing how this market plays out in the future. Liquidation, for example, can serve many functions. One of the biggest problems that the crypto markets have in any jurisdiction, US, Dubai, or Hong Kong, is lack of liquidity in certain areas. And this will be a liquidity injection, meaning there are more assets available for trade in Hong Kong, giving it a significant advantage. But excessive selling of it can basically drive price up or down. Now, a lot of people have actually reacted quite in a panic way and say, oh, does this mean China is going to crash the crypto market if Trump doesn't play ball? Because that's one way of wiping out significant portion of his family's portfolio. I wouldn't say that. It just means that the Hong Kong market, for example, can play many ways. For instance, national team players within the private market can use accumulation techniques to basically scoop up a lot of crypto, be it a seized crypto that is being liquidated in Hong Kong's market, and drive up the price. And this will basically be something that's very attractive to the Trump family. But at the same time, it can basically control it downwards or upward at its own discretion. So with the fact that Eric Trump have to come to Hong Kong to basically attend that summit, it shows how much influence that Hong Kong actually have by comparison to other jurisdictions that are trying to vie for being the next crypto capital.
Earlier, you pointed to the common law versus civil law divide. Certainly, I mean, your knowledge is better than mine. I mean, but those of us that, endeavored to study comparative law when we were in law school and took the, basic courses of comparative law, conflicts of law, public international law, international business transactions, to get a feel for it. Quickly, one develops a sense that, generally speaking, it's not always the case, because there are common law jurisdictions that, quite frankly, no one would want to enter. But generally speaking, the sense is that common law jurisdictions are more pro-commerce. They're more pro-business.
freedom of contracts. These are all enshrined under common law at the end.
Right.
by
And so with that in mind, is there something, are common law jurisdictions better for crypto? Are they more receptive to crypto? Are they better incubators for the development and the growth and scaling up of crypto because of the way, simply because of the spirit of the common law, that it's more flexible, more fluid?
Now, spirit of common law, even in the US, for example, we have talked about Andrew Jackson just now, and the whole idea of freedom of the markets, freedom of commerce has really been enshrined by common law developments that have happened for the past few centuries, really. Whereas civil law, for example, has an emphasis on stronger government control and market regulation. It's after all derived from Roman, French, German legal tradition, which has
Right,
historically
the Justinian digests.
exactly.
And even the philosophies are so different that in the US, it's about antitrust law. In the European context, they call it competition law. The Europeans are more about we want to facilitate more competition. The Americans are like, no, we don't mind if you have monopoly, if you become a trust in your field, and the sole power, sole juggernaut in your industry. Just be a good trust, and so you see that even though it seems though they're trying to regulate the same thing, very different underlying philosophies on what is the role of the individual, the role of the government, what are your rights, what's the definition of freedom and liberty, and ideal policy goals for society. I'm sorry, I interrupted.
Well, again, you pointed out very different culture. Civil law jurisdiction does emphasize higher degree of government ownership of financial institutions. And as reflected in the past, for example, a lot of people have actually emphasized have been critical of government overreach until there is a collapse. For example, I like to use FTX as an example. When FTX collapsed, it's actually only Japanese users that get to withdraw their funds because of how the laws are so how do I say it, pioneering at that time. They're the only jurisdiction with a comprehensive set of regulations at that time, and they don't get enough credit for it, really. The other thing that the difference is also about monetary sovereignty and policy tools that civil law jurisdiction does actually like to emphasize. Centralized money, for example. And this actually can be traced all the way back to antiquity. We know how the Roman Empire Western Roman Empire actually fell because of attempts to control inflation and the issue that they have with essentially what we have in modern day issues of printing money, right? The devaluation of the denarii back in the day. And of course, civil law.
That's right. They would shave the edges off of coins.
Yes.
And it goes back to Gresham's law in economics. Good money drives out bad money. It's been understood to be people want to hang on to their gold, but they want to spend their paper money. So it's paper money drives out gold out of the economy.
Yeah, and this is in contrast to common law jurisdiction, where we basically have significant emphasis on private property rights and market efficiencies, right? It's written into our constitution. It's enshrined in multiple aspects, not just commercial law that really enshrines these rights. And common law system prioritize protecting private property and contractual freedom and innovation through market mechanisms rather than direct state control. This is actually the pillar of the Commonwealth economies, really, and that is an influence over a quarter of the entire globe. So these are all things that that we can see.
My concern with the U.S. and its anti-CBDC position is they're giving the market too much of what they want. They're ceding too much ground. Whereas I never thought I'd end up saying this, but I think China is adopting a more prudent, stable position by saying, no, this is an emerging technology. It has potentially great implications for the financial system and the broader economy, and that the state ought to have some kind of presence or how to have some kind of position or to be somewhat of a player in this. Yes, the private sector can do their stable coins, but that doesn't mean that it's to the exclusion of CBDCs. The two are not mutually exclusive. They serve different purposes. Why don't the Americans understand that?
Well, again, when the economy is going good, people always love not having too much intervention because they love the profits. Think of the bubble right before the 2008 financial crisis, right? Which I think about the time before Enron collapsed. Everyone loves the bandwagon until things really hit the fan. Conversely, when Lehman Brothers collapsed, when Enron collapsed, when Terra Luna collapsed, everyone suddenly takes a U-turn and say, regulators have actually slept on the job. So this is fundamentally really a problem with how human psychology really works at the end of the day. Now, you did point out one thing that's quite correct. Look, stablecoin is only stable because it's pegged to a certain currency. Stablecoin was innovated at a time. The pre-set stablecoin era, for example, a lot of traders are dealing with what we call hyper volatility within the crypto market. So at the end of the day, when you're done trading Bitcoin versus other digital assets, you don't know if you are actually financially better off or financially worse off. And that's the whole concept of basically having a fiat reference from the early days. It was innovated, inspired by how the Hong Kong dollar was, of course, pegged to the US currency. And depending on and keep in mind, the dollar dominance is being challenged, and people are talking about how the dollar is actually weaker than ever against the euro right now. So stablecoin is only so stable depending on what they're pegged to. These are things that I don't think people are really alert to at this particular juncture. And these are risks that are actually absolutely out there. Now, this is why certain stablecoin that are not only just backed by treasury bonds and actual fiat deposits might actually end up being more secure. For example, certain issuers out there have within the portfolio precious metals as assets that are basically sustaining the valuation of the tokens, and we will see how it plays out because gold, for example, technically, it's arguable that it's still outperforming Bitcoin to an extent. So, for example, also have actual intrinsic use in the real world.
My own view is that from having lived there, having studied law there, I mean, being a close admirer and watcher of the US for as long as I have, it is an incredibly reactionary society. It was like only after 9/11 did they pass the Patriot Act, relevant money laundering provisions, terrorist financing, even though there were calls, if you examine the legislative history, people like Senator Levin of Florida, calling for tighter AML CTF rules before 9/11. Again, same with Enron had to fall for them to pass Sarbanes-Oxley. Then you had the subprime crisis, global financial crisis that ensued. Then they passed Dodd-Frank. It's a very reactionary society, and they only respond to crises. But if we shift the focus away from the U.S., what does it mean for us here in Hong Kong, here in Asia? What are the challenges? What are the potential perils? What are the possibilities? What are the opportunities? What does it mean for us on a practical level?
On the practical level, it's always about risk mitigation because volatility is something that is You can't basically legislate your way to a perfect world where there's economic equilibrium and growth is the only direction forward. There's a reason why there's market corrections, and companies that, for example, another um, piece of article that I've recently written about is the risk that a lot of listed companies are facing if they basically do the what we call Bitcoin that are jumping on the Bitcoin treasury bandwagon, because for example, Bitcoin historically, whenever it corrects, have a 60+% correction. We've seen that in 2017, 2022, but we have not seen that to this very date. The last correction is around 30+%. Now, if you look at certain listed company in the US, without naming names, but I think you can figure out which one it is, having been aggressively accumulating Bitcoin in a leveraged portfolio, that's a huge risk because 60% correction might end up basically exceeding the entire market capitalization of their entire company. What does that mean for the stock market? Will there be a contagion effect? We don't know. Now, right now, we are looking at what a lot of economic analysts kept on saying is it's still a bull market, but bull market doesn't run forever, right? So what are the risk mitigation measures that these institutions and entities have in place to protect the stakeholders from risk in the eventual downturn that we will face eventually? Now, for example, right now we do see greed index at an all-time high. Whenever you have a lot of media out there that's just saying crypto is only going one direction, the only way up, it's significant indication of risk again, because that means a lot of people are jumping on at the tail end and they are being exposed to risk in that way.
There is so much bandwagoning, people jumping on it because they fear missing out, FOMO, fear missing out. They fear other people are getting rich on it. I better get in on it quick. And yeah, that concerns me, that people coming in at at the tail end. I just fear too many people are going to get burned.
Or just look at the recent passage of the Stablecoin Ordinance, and what they have, what Eddie Yu, the chief executive of HKMA, have said. Essentially, they're saying there's huge market euphoria, and I'm quoting from him because I've quoted him in my previous article, so I have the quote on hand. He actually said, "What's more concerning is the growing frothiness of the market, and the recent hype surrounding stablecoins has led to excessive exuberance. For instance, a mere announcement of intention to explore stablecoin related business or digital assets is enough for some listed companies to grab headlines and send the stock prices trading volume soaring." The problem is stock prices seems to have something called gravity playing as well. And what happens when you have that correction coming back down? Who is getting burned, right? These are all consideration that you have to have when you want to basically have a measure of stability within the market. Because oftentimes we see people jumping in at the last minute are basically people with the most to risk, but
by which time the smart money has already moved on.
Exactly, and they're the least group that is able to sustain the loss.
Again, my own view is we have to cover crypto. It is a technology that's going to be an integral part of the financial systems of the future. I personally I'm not sold on it, and frankly, because I'm wondering where are these valuations coming from. Beyond that, there's no central market clearing system there with an exchange. I mean, beyond that, I do fear, perhaps not, in the foreseeable future, a lot of people are going to get burned. Josh, in the time we've got left before we wrap up, any closing thoughts you'd like to leave
it's
our
always
listeners with?
Yeah, it's always important to basically, if you're in a market participant, to avoid being carried off by euphoria. Bitcoin has a lot of great applications or innovations that has yet to be explored. But one of the warnings I had is it's a technology at the end of the day. That means there's a technological life cycle. Think about yourself right now. Are you using any piece of technology? Is your cell phone from 15 years ago? Bitcoin has been around for over a decade by this point. And you have to keep the technological life cycle in mind when you're looking into it. And that is why recently we have some of the oldest players within the crypto market suddenly liquidating their entire Bitcoin portfolio and then reinvesting in crypto infrastructure instead as being something more long term, because even they are sensing the risk entailed for an aging technology.
Joshua Chu, thank you so much for your time. And to our listeners, thank you. Until next time.